All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and start here. Welcome to tonight's Omaha Table Talk. My name is Dominique Green, and I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Programs and Faculty Manager at Inclusive Communities. Before we start tonight's conversation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the indigenous people that most of us gather on tonight, that belong to the Omaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Odo, and most recently the Santee, Sioux, and Winnebago Native people. Omaha Table Talk, or OTT as we call it, was initially created in Omaha in 2003 by the Social Justice Advisory Committee of Catholic Charities, Omaha. More than a decade ago, Inclusive Communities acquired OTT and shifted to a larger public discussions over comfort food. Now, due to COVID-19, we have shifted to holding these events and conversations over Zoom for this year. We welcome you, though, to still have a snack or food or a drink with you during these discussions tonight. We are also looking at ways that we can continue to grow and get better at offering these events. So at the end of tonight's conversation and event, we will post a link to our evaluation. And please, we encourage you to fill that out and offer us any advice on how we can improve. We'd like to thank our Omaha Table Talk sponsors, Lozier Foundation and Cox Communications, for making events like tonight possible. And now I'm going to turn this over to Molly to cover some housekeeping rules before we start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Welsh. I am the Operations and Projects Manager at Inclusive Communities. Welcome. I just have a few housekeeping items. The data sheet that we're looking at right here will be available to you. I'll send out a link in the chat as soon as I finish sharing, and we'll send a follow-up email either tomorrow or Thursday with some of the resources shared here tonight, as well as the data sheet. There's some great resources that the panelists have provided. I want to point out one slide here, and that's our agreements slide. Every event that we have, we try to have agreements with everyone participating, just so the expectations are clear. We are asking that y'all remain on camera as much as possible. We love seeing your faces. All of these virtual events are wonderful. I really miss seeing everyone in person. Please remain on mute while others are speaking, but be ready to participate. There will be a breakout discussion portion of the evening. Minimize your other open windows and maybe put your phone somewhere where you can't reach it, and give yourself the opportunity to really participate in tonight's discussion. Feel free to raise your hand either physically, or there is a little raise your hand button somewhere. And open up the chat function. I'll be monitoring the chat tonight. I'm really just here to give support. I'm just gonna keep flipping backwards. There we go. And I'll try to answer questions or get your voice heard in chat, but it is a function. Y'all can talk to each other, share resources there. And the last thing we ask you to do is rename yourself if you can. We're identifying our facilitators tonight for the breakout room by, some of you can see that they say facilitator before their name, so we'll know the folks that are going to help us discuss some of this in our small groups. And we believe in normalizing pronouns at Inclusive Communities, so if you're comfortable and would like to rename with your name and your pronouns, that would be wonderful. Let's see, the format for this evening. We love structure. I love structure. And we'll have a timeline here tonight to share with you. I'm going to put it in the chat so you can see what we're doing. We've got a panel discussion. There we go. And then we'll go into our breakout rooms and small discussions. We'll come back and we'll share out what we discussed in those breakout rooms. And then we'll have time for an action item wrap up and time for you to fill out that evaluation that Dominique was talking about. Reminder that we are recording, so if you would like your image not to be used, go ahead and turn off your camera. We won't be recording the breakout sessions, as those rooms are spaces that we want people to feel safe enough to ask questions and get into the meat of the matter, but we will be recording the panel discussion and the share out portion, and it will be on our YouTube page. The previous OTTs are also on our YouTube page if you're interested in attending one of those. I would like to introduce the Omaha famous Pam Duncan. She is our ASL interpreter this evening. If you'd like to pin her video, we love watching her. We have a Pam cam. We love you, Pam. She is our wonderful interpreter, and all of our events will either have Pam or one of her colleagues with us. All right, I'm going to throw that data sheet in the link for you. And it's back to you, Dominic.
All right. So if you are utilizing Pam and her resources, please let Molly or I know in chat so that we can make sure to put you all in the same breakout room when it comes to that. Thank you to our volunteers and facilitators for helping us out tonight. And with that, I want to introduce tonight's moderator for our panel discussion, Chantel Mallory. Chantel, all with you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. So it's really good to see everybody. It's good to see everyone's faces tonight. Something that I don't take for granted is the opportunity not only to be a board member of this amazing organization, but to be in your company tonight and to moderate a panel with such impressive voices in this area of work. I'm going to start out by just introducing our panelists. And then once I finish that, I'll go ahead and throw out the first question to our panelists and we'll get started. So our first panelist is Shakur Abdullah. Shakur is an Omaha, Nebraska-based restorative justice facilitator and trainer, as well as an outreach specialist for the Community Justice Center, CJC, a restorative justice public safety agency headquartered in Lincoln. He is also a National Institute of Corrections certified offender workforce development specialist. He has a vast experience and expertise in providing pre- and post-release reentry services to justice-involved individuals in Nebraska and Iowa. And that effort began in 2016 as a reentry specialist at Reconnect, Inc. Shakur is a leader in the Incarcerated Children's Advocacy Network, ICANN, an organization comprised of former juvenile lifers and an affiliate of the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth. He is also a member and emerging leader of Just Leadership USA, which is dedicated to cutting the U.S. correctional population in half by 2030 via empowering people most affected by incarceration to drive policy reform. Shakur has led efforts for returning citizens' voting rights reform initiatives in Nebraska through Just Us 15 Vote, which he established himself. He brings an extensive background of over 4 decades of incarcerated experience to all of his work in this field. Arrested at 16 years old in 1975, he was sentenced to death at 17 years old. Shakur was discharged from the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services custody in 2016 upon completion of a homicide sentence. While incarcerated, he took advantage of rehabilitative opportunities, personal, academic, and vocational, to be released from prison better, not bitter. Locally and nationally, he has been a subject matter expert and featured panelist on issues of juvenile justice, returning citizens' voting rights, mass incarceration, and reentry. Shakur's passion is to help repair the harm he created and assist others in accomplishing the same duty. His extensive experience connecting families to community resources has clearly made him a gifted advocate. It is through this work and so many other paths that Shakur demonstrates a firm commitment to youth justice, community empowerment, and redemption. And Shakur goes by the pronouns he, him. And so let's all welcome Shakur Abdullah to the panel. And our second panelist is the Dominique Morgan. Pronouns are she, her. Dominique Morgan is an award-winning artist, activist, and TEDx speaker. As the executive director of Black and Pink, the largest prison abolitionist organization in the United States. She works daily to dismantle the systems that perpetuate violence on LGBTQ, GNC people, and individuals living with HIV/AIDS. Partnering her lived experience of being impacted by mass incarceration, including 18 months in solitary confinement, with a decade of change-making artistry, advocacy, and background in public health, she continues to work in spaces of sex education, radical self-care, and transformative youth development with intentions of dismantling the prison industrial complex and its impact on our communities. Ms. Morgan is a 2020 Fellow 10 Outstanding Young Americans Award recipient and a 2020 J.M. Kaplan Innovation Prize recipient. She is currently completing her capstone project for studies in the Georgetown University System-Involved LGBTQ Youth Scholar Program. So please welcome my good friend, Dominique Morgan. All right, amazing people to be moderating on this panel. I am humbled, I am honored. My cousin is interpreting for us, so this is our first time working together, so I appreciate that opportunity as well. And we'll get started with the first question for the panel. So to kick off our exploration of this important topic, of which both of you are very knowledgeable and passionate, what are some of the current struggles or nuanced issues in your personal mass incarceration reform work that you would like to bring some awareness to or inspire folks to do more research on or become involved with? And I'll throw that to Dominique first and then Shakur.
Thank you, Chantal. Really focusing right now on the Prison Rape Elimination Act. And although it's a national policy, individual states have a lot of room in how they implement that work. And historically, LGBTQ plus people are the most impacted by PREA. And in Nebraska specifically, it's more used as a way to place queer folks in solitary confinement, a way to kind of like, it's a controlling tool, when it was really established to create a way for people who have experienced harm in any capacity to be able to receive services, to report it, to find some restoration. So we're about to lead into that. I'm a member of the inaugural class, the Black Futures Lab Policy Institute. So we are going to bring that work to Nebraska. And then this private prison that people are discussing. I think it's interesting that a system that has been ill-equipped to do any of the work they've needed to do for the last 20 years at least would have the audacity to then bring in a new institution and then position it in a way that we know folks are going to be victimized. And when I'm talking about folks, incarcerated people in that space. I have never seen or heard about a for-profit prison that the profit margin isn't dictated on the number of bodies and the way those bodies are treated inside of those institutions. And so it's scary that in our state, no matter whether folks are incarcerated or not, they're still Nebraskans. They're still Nebraskans, that we're comfortable and people are attempting to stoke conversations that would create this sort of facility in our state. So those are two big things that we're talking about, and housing, of course, specifically around LGBTQ plus folks and trans people. Folks come out of incarceration and we get you a job and we get you into education, and they still walk in and apply for housing, and you can have everything else lined up, but due to the biases or the barriers to the person that's going to rent to you or otherwise, you won't find housing. And then when that person recidivates, we as a community act like we don't know how it could have happened. When in all actuality, we're not doing enough work amongst us to really create the type of community that welcomes people and really bathes people in opportunities when they return, like we should. So those are the big, I think the big buckets where you see my work and the work of Black and Pink in Nebraska specifically.
Thank you. And Shakur, if you would answer the same question.
So thanks for having me. There's two quick issues that I want to focus in on. This is mass incarceration conversation. So, let's just kind of quickly frame that. We live in the most incarcerated spot anywhere on the face of the earth. 5% of the world's population is here in the United States, but we constitute 25% of everybody locked up anywhere. Those numbers immediately begin to be disproportionate when you look in terms of different racial groups, of how that impacts them. The two issues that I immediately focus in on, one is juvenile life without parole. There are efforts underway in Nebraska to eliminate that sentence, started in the United States Supreme Court as far back as 2005 with the elimination of the juvenile death penalty for anybody under 18 years old. There was a number of decisions made after that, concluding with Miller versus Alabama and Montgomery versus Louisiana, that allow me to be out today. But I believe that threshold of 18 years old is still just too low. Brain science tells us now that the human brain doesn't develop until age 25. That's where I have my sights set. If we just think back for a second, just recently, the nation raised the smoking limit to age 21. So the society as a whole attempts to talk about protecting children, but they certainly don't do a very good job of it when, unfortunately, a child commits a harmful act and then they want to be treated as an adult. So the elimination of life without parole, which bill was introduced by Senator Patty Pansing-Brook this last legislative cycle to actually do away with that sentence. I have helped her with that legislation and plan on doing so in the future to just eliminate that sentence in the state and hopefully raise the age limit to where the science is. The other issue is voting. Since I have been released, have been working with Senator Wayne on an effort to eliminate what I call the 2-year exile voting currently in Nebraska. You are prevented from voting 2 years after discharge. Now, if you are on parole or probation, that period even becomes more extended because during the extent of your probation or your parole, you are prevented from voting. And then that 2-year clock doesn't start to tick until after that period has been completed. So that even draws the period of exile out for a much longer time. There are 3 places, Maine, Vermont, and the District of Columbia, that have no voter restrictions for individuals in their state. I should clarify that for citizens in their state, whether they are in jails, prisons, they are allowed to vote. For me, that is what I am striving for, a national model that allows every incarcerated citizen to vote regardless of which side of the fence that they are on. You remain a citizen even with a felony, and that is part of the process that includes you in the say in what happens in society. It is important and crucial part to reintegrating you into society And those are the two areas that I am focused in on at this point.
Thank you. All very important work. I do want to zero in a little bit, and I know that it was already mentioned by both of you that there are some issues that are very specific to Nebraska. And so if you could just elaborate a little bit more on some Nebraska specific mass incarceration issues that need a lot more awareness and attention brought to them. Kind of what are the issues that are out there that are state specific, and what is your work involving right now in those issues?
The Nebraska Department of Corrections has been over like the threshold of being over capacity as a system since, and Shakur, like you, I came in 2000, but since like 2001, like when they closed Hastings, there was a huge shift. And then they shut down several housing units at OCC. And so there was a backup. So it went from a 30-day expected time in diagnostic and evaluation center to 90 was the norm. And then you felt like it was ridiculous. And now I hear folks say, you know, if I have under a year, I probably will never leave D&E to get to my facility. I'll never get any sort of treatment, any sort of access to the barbaric programming that they offer that's at the bare minimum. So you have a system that's been over, that has had the weight of it kind of stressed for 20 years. And I believe a huge part of accountability is saying, listen, I've tried my best, I need help and assistance. And what I've seen over the last couple of years with corrections, working with with the Unicam, and there's been senators over and over again, like, what do you need? And they refuse to talk about the real barriers, right? I identify as an abolitionist, and I'm not ashamed about that at all whatsoever, because one of the foundational values is grace. So I try to be understanding and meet folks where they are, but you have to let us know that we got to meet you there. And corrections hasn't done that yet, while folks inside are suffering. That's something that just I wrestle with every night. I also think that a big concern that I have is that our state has allotted dollars for reentry work to support agencies. However, corrections is the grantor. And I talk to folks about this all the time. That's like being in an abusive relationship and the partner that abused you taking you to the doctor and paying for your doctor bills. Why is this system that is engaging in harm of people in our state, why are they in charge of $3 million that is meant to pour back into our community so these folks can receive access to services? That's something that we really need to address. And we also need to just admit that we have a problem with our correction system in Nebraska. As Nebraskans, we're very much, oh, that's not us. Oh, that's a big city problem. Or, that's, and definitely can't have someone from out of state coming here telling us areas of growth that we have. We're just not trying to hear that. But we need to admit the problem. We need to admit it and stand on it. And I don't think that like structural change, I don't think that relief and restoration will really happen until we're able to have those conversations.
So in 1975, when I went to prison, the nation as a whole had a prison population right around 350,000. 2.3 million now nationwide. Nebraska is either the first or second most overcrowded system in the nation, behind Alabama. We trade spots with Alabama just in terms of who is overcrowded the most this particular month. So it's either Alabama or Nebraska. So over the course of 40 years, the Nebraska Department of Corrections has grown to 10 facilities that it operates now. On any given day, it still has one of the smallest prison populations in the country, not exceeding 5,500 people. If you look at today's count, I think it's right at 53, 5,300 and something. So in those terms, it is very small, given you have some county jails that may have 14,000 people in it. So there was an overcrowding period when I went to prison. It certainly was one by the time I left. So there was a large number of programs that existed when I went to prison that has simply been phased out. I do not think that reform necessarily to prison policies and practices in and of itself is going to resolve this issue. Corrections does not exist in a vacuum. It's all interconnected with everything else. I think that there has to be a holistic approach taken to stem the tide of the direction in which things are going now. A lot of that deals with programming. I mean, the ultimate litmus test for whether or not your corrections program is successful, I think, has to involve recidivism. So how many people are you having return to the system? It's generally calibrated on a three-year window. Nebraska, their recidivism rate is up in the 30 percentile. So it's still much too high for the numbers that they have. There are, again, programs that have gone away that I think could go a long way to sending or having citizens return to society in a way that they don't recidivate. I think right now it is pretty much just warehousing, and the programming that is offered, it's certainly not enough, and it is certainly not available widely enough to where everybody has access to it. And this, in my opinion, just contributes to the overall problem that Nebraska is encountering at this point. And I think that there are a lot of things going on across the country that could be implemented here to bring the numbers down.
Thank you both. I want to pivot a little bit at this point to a question that is kind of near and dear to me personally. As a 15-year juvenile court attorney who has represented thousands of court-involved youth, institution exposed, Black youth, queer youth, other youth of color, what specific issues within the realm of mass incarceration reform are especially impactful right now to our youth populations?
COVID-19 is making it so difficult for these young people, to connect with trusted adults and family through visitation. I believe there was a memo sent out that the courthouses are going to be closed till January. A lot of parents are calling me and emailing me about their court dates being canceled. They've worked all year, taken all the classes, and they expected to have their child home before Thanksgiving, and now that may not be happening. So COVID-19 is really hammering on young folks. I think when it comes to young people of color, and I'll go deeper. I think we've learned after this election to stop being not halfway having the conversation. Black youth, that these kids are going into these systems and they are getting huge prison sentences in ways that I can't comprehend. The Nebraska, the NCYF facility, the youth state prison, it saddens me that it even exists, that we need an entire facility that state ran for young people in our community. And these Black young folks are being pushed into this system earlier and earlier without any sort of light at the end of the tunnel, and their parents feel like they're powerless. And so these families just kind of the power of Black family in our city is can really be attacked by these systems. That's what we're seeing a lot. The advocates for young people aren't listening to the young people that they're supposed to be serving. And last but not least, when we look at like LGBTQ plus youth who are in the system, many of these spaces are ran as if, well, I'm going to run this space as if I was your parent, or I'm going to approach this space from my personal values. So and most of the staff and folks in these facilities are white people. So not only is there is a epistemological kind of dissonance when it comes to like culture, but when you look at queerness and you look at transness and gender nonconformity and all of those, and even gender presentation, these young people's autonomy are being robbed of them. They're being prevented from showing up as their whole selves. And last but not least, comprehensive sex education for these kids. The fastest group of young people who are becoming teen parents are LGBTQ plus youth. And everyone's always shocked. And it's because when we do sex education, we don't talk to queer youth because either we're uncomfortable or we don't think that we need to talk to them, because the more you educate a young person, that means, of course, that's the more sex they'll have. And then when they're in these systems, they're not giving access to that information. And so we see that a lot at Black and Pink, young people who are reaching out to us, and some of them I can't even engage in providing services because of their age, and trying to shift them through Yes House and then trying to, through Yes, but it's rampant. It's larger than you all think. Many of them going into sex work. Black and Pink we've spent about $100,000 this year on bail support. And so when young people call us 18, 19, we get them out. And it's the same story. I was in juvie, I turned 18, turned 19, they released me, and I didn't have any other options. I couldn't go home. The foster home took the phone back they gave me, all these other things. So really making sure that these babies have a safety net post what we consider adulthood in our state, to make sure that they're just not pushed straight into the adult prison system.
Yeah, I think that, the things that Dominique mentioned are correct. In my opinion, the society does a lot of lip service about how much it cares for its children. But when you really strip it down and take a look at it, what you begin to see is that that really isn't the case. In Nebraska, any child 14 years old can end up with an adult sentence. They will be housed in NCYF. It is the smallest in every aspect of a facility operated within those other 9 facilities in the state. The average cost per individual there, per child there, is $103,000 a year. That cost takes into account the fact that they are children. And just because they have been tried as an adult, sentenced as an adult, they will still be treated as a child until they either are transferred out of that facility. They can be there all the way up to 21 years and 10 months and then get transferred to an adult facility. So the society, even though these children have been adjudicated as adults, up until 21 years and 10 months, still attempt to try to protect them from the adults by having an entirely different facility for them, which to me kind of defeats the whole purpose. I think ideally, no child should ever be subject to an adult sentence. That is going to require the society as a whole to shift its disposition and its mindset on what is an appropriate sentence for a child. Nebraska is certainly not the worst because there are some jurisdictions that don't have a minimum age in which a child can be tried. So theoretically, a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old in certain jurisdictions can be tried as an adult and tossed into the system where, along with COVID-19 and all of the other problems that are there, they immediately begin to be impacted by that. And at some point, for the most part, that sentence will end and they will return to society. And the society has to weigh how they want these children, these citizens being returned into their community. It can't always be a thing of saying, see, I told you, look, they are just irreparably corrupt and can't be reached, and they went in and they came out worse than they did. To quote Malcolm X, you can't break my leg and then accuse me of being a cripple. The society can't be complicit in what eventually happens in some of these cases if it hasn't done its part.
Excellent. I know that we could probably talk about this topic for days and days. It's that important. We do have to wrap so that we can move on to the next portion of our programming, which is the breakout rooms and small group discussions. But before we wrap that up, just briefly, one last question for the panelists. If you could leave tonight's Omaha Table Talk participants with an action-oriented activity or a suggestion for building their activism or awareness about issues of mass incarceration reform, what would you suggest those action items or other ways for activism and awareness be? And we have about 2 minutes, so maybe about a minute per speaker. And Shakur, would you like to go first? And then Dominique.
I don't think that I will need a minute. I'm just going to be as succinct as possible. I think people need to be civically engaged in a way to where they are informed and passionate about those interests that affect them directly. Voting, contacting your senators, whether they be local or national, the city council, all of these things are a way of helping us to move the needle and shape policy.
I would say reach out to someone that you're connected to that's incarcerated. We all know someone. So do that on a macro level. That the larger work sometimes it looks great, but not everybody's fit for that. My challenge is find the folks that are closest to you that are impacted and reach out. And when you hear misinformation, correct misinformation. Share information amongst all your people about what's really happening. Because what I see most times from a space of grace is that people are always saying, well, I just didn't know. And although we're a large state, we should be able to really saturate this community with the truth of what's happening in corrections. So please let's do a better job of that. There was an individual that died 2 weeks ago of COVID-19 in Nebraska system, and I barely saw a peep about it on social media. And that's something that we can do. So please start at home and show up for your people.
I love it. I love the personalized touch of that. And I love the macro and micro suggestions that have been given and all of the inputs. So I thank both of the panelists for your time and your expertise, as well as your passion and dedication to this very important work. I'm going to turn it back over to Dominique right now so that you can facilitate the breakout rooms and small groups. And I do want to thank Inclusive Communities for the opportunity to participate tonight.
Thank you, Chantel. And Yeah, everybody, we will be returning back from the breakout rooms to do some large group share out. So please stay on with us if you're available. Molly is setting up or has set up all the breakout rooms and is going to introduce a couple of norms right before we go into our breakout rooms for our conversations.
Yeah, usually I would share my screen, but I'm gonna make this quick. The agreements that we have for breakout rooms, like I said earlier, these are a little bit safer spaces where you can share stories, and we have some great facilitators who will introduce themselves when we get into groups, and they have some guided questions for us. When we met to talk through this panel, we wanted to focus these breakout rooms on specific topics because mass incarceration reform is just such a large, as we've found tonight, there's so many topics, but we felt like when we looked at all the questions, it was important to stay a little bit zoomed out and focus on those action items. So the norms we have tonight are, we call it the Vegas twist, which means the stories that you share stay in the room, but the lessons that you learn leave with you. Make space, take space. So if one person is taking up too much space, the other folks in the room aren't able to take up as much space. So make space, take space for others, keep open minds, and be respectful, and one person talking at a time. I'm going to open up these rooms. We'll come back about 7:03 and do the final portion of the event.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some fruitful conversations in your breakout rooms. This point, we're going to go around and do some share outs. So we're going to go through all 6 groups. And if you can just take a minute to kind of share out what your group discussed, and maybe if there were some really good, thoughtful action items or ways that community folks can get involved in this work that came out of those discussions, that would be great to share out as well. If we could start with group 1, and somebody from that group that wants to share out for us, that'd be great.
That would be me, and I'll keep mine brief and tight because my Wi-Fi is spotty. Really one of the things that we kind of got the most engagement out of was talking about the narrative and the difference in what we're told from, media and, what we consume about how the police and how prisons and everything are supposed to be versus the reality that some of us know personally and more people have come to realize this year. So while it has been a summer of protest and, time for people to get up off the couch, we know this is still going to be an ongoing struggle because it didn't get here in a short amount of time. So it's going to take quite a while and quite a lot of work for us to actually move the needle even, a little bit.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else from group 1 want to share something? All right, moving on to group 2. Who would like to share from group 2?
Can you maybe tell us who? I did not see.
I didn't put the rooms together, Molly did.
Molly, can you just give us a couple names so we can figure it out?
Group 2, Rhiannon was our facilitator, and Janet and Rita were in group 2.
Thank you.
Who did you choose to represent you, group 2? I voluntold Rita. Rita, tell us what you talked about.
Well, we talked about the fact that white people have to care in order to learn about and to make, it's like the first gentleman said, this is a beginning, but we have to learn more. We have to figure out how we can reach out, in a personal way, that when there is that the experience of having someone who is incarcerated um, to actually know somebody who has that story, you know, it makes it more personal, and, you know, you want to know and you want to do what you can to help.
Mhm.
Thank you. Group 3, we had Denise, Luis,
Meeting.
Mary, Barton, Rebecca, Rick, and Shalina.
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Who is your representative from room 3?
I think Shalina, we can't hear you that well.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I don't know. Can you hear me now?
It's a little better.
Well, maybe someone else should do it. Sorry.
No worries, we all have those days of technology. There's somebody else from group 3 that's able to share out.
We could hear you.
Oh, Mary. Yes, great. Okay.
We could hear her fine in the room. So, but I have a friend whose computer does that to her. I think one of the things we talked about were the numbers, that we were surprised about how much the growth had been that Shakur talked about when he went in and what it was now. I mean, I knew it had grown exponentially, but that was quite enlightening. And then we talked some about some of our personal experiences in terms of knowing someone or how we got acquainted with someone in the system. And I don't know, Denise, do you want to add something else?
You started to talk at the end about the zero tolerance policy and how that has contributed to the pipeline and how it needs to be reformed or changed.
Anybody else from room 3 like to share before we move on to room 4? Room 4 had Kathy, Larissa, Jason, Libby, and Mary Lee.
I am Libby. I was second choice in group 4, so I'll take it. Counting on people to chime in if I miss something. The cool thing about our group was there was a really broad range of experience. So we had people like really new to this topic, people who have been personally affected and have been, you know, in this system in one way or another for many, many years, and then people kind of in the middle. And so I think that was a really beautiful thing about our conversation. And then I think one of the things that we really kind of touched people was like that personal connection of knowing someone in the system and the benefits of that and how that can help shape a person's view on prison reform once we get beyond the person who's sitting in prison. And at the very end, we were talking about the school to prison pipeline, and Jason gave some really great insights and just about, you know, things start before you get to prison. There's a problem there. Is you don't just wake up one day and go commit a crime usually. And so I think that was, I don't know, just really insightful and realizing, you know, bringing some empathy into the conversation.
Thank you.
Anybody else from room 4 before we move to room 5? Room 5, we had Christy, Kim, Mary, and Bradley Aquiricu. I love saying your name, Brad.
That's very name. Nice of you. Yeah, it rolls right off your tongue. You've been right? I didn't do my duty as a facilitator and assign anybody, so I'll jump in here and hope that a couple of my group members jump. We had some very similar experiences. So being able to talk about not only the shock at some of the stats, some of the growth and some of the injustices that are going on, but then how does this directly affect you, yourself, your thinking, intersect that with what you thought you know, as a younger person and what you were taught, and we had some share about some of the lessons that they learned early on, but then now as an adult, they were like, oh well, when I grew up, I understand it differently now, and maybe I have family structure or you know, relatives or friends or community members that I know that are now impacted in a certain kind of way. And now, you know, the activation part is, how do we get to, you know, policymakers? How do we get to community members? You know, similar to what was just shared, how do we get to those things, all of those barriers that stand in the way or make you funnel down a certain way? So I'm going to get out of the way and pass it to some of my group members. Hopefully they jump in and share how rich our discussion was.
Christy, Kim, or Mary, would you like to jump in?
This is Kim. I will just jump in that, you know, I was raised in rural Nebraska in a very racist community, and, you know, anyone who went to prison was bad, bad, bad. And I think Mary and I both kind of shared that. That was our background. And just learning now of all of the things that happen, of how people end up in prison, it's mind-boggling to me, and I'm very much trying to learn. And it's just completely changed my life, how the you know, the school to prison pipeline is working very well, and how it should not be, but it is working.
Thank you. We got room 6, Colin, Doug, Tina, and Tia. Who would like to share out from your group?
I also failed as a facilitator and did not assign anyone. So you're not alone, Brad. I will say that a couple of themes that kept coming up for us is how heavily influenced we were by the messages that went with that generation. So, you know, I grew up in the 80s where it was the war on drugs, and that was the crime focus. And so that had a lot to do with it, like the way that the country talked about it at that point in time. You know, also like the surge of shows around crime and how that impacted our awareness around this topic. So that was really interesting. What am I missing, Colin and Tia and Doug and Janine? Doug, you are on mute.
Yeah. Tia was saying some things about, and other people said, and this struck me, about the number of TV shows that were exploded at that time, that really framed people's points of view.
Yeah.
You know, it's propaganda, and it was a way of creating these mythologies, these destructive mythologies about people of color, about poor people, and especially about the criminal justice system, and how good it is, and how it protects us all. And it is propaganda that is as effective and as vicious as anything you'd find and probably even a lot better than you find in these authoritarian dictatorship states. I'm just reflecting on that right now, is how much crime programming and crime shows there were and still are.
Yeah. I also, Tia said something impactful also about remembering when the 3 strikes, and Tia, I don't want to speak over you, so if you want to share, please do, but remembering the 3 strikes legislation and the impact that had on people's lives. So.
Well, thank you. It sounds like you all had some really good conversations, and we encourage you to have these conversations within your own circles and your own friends and family. That's the only way that this message and is going to continue to grow and impact and change being made. At this time, we do have a few minutes if there are a couple questions that you would like to ask Shakur or Chantel. Dominique unfortunately had to leave early. So if anybody have questions for them, we have a couple minutes and can address them. You can either raise your hand physically or just unmute yourself and start talking if I don't see you.
Well, I'll jump in real quick. Mr. Shakur, I'd like to know, you know, it's going to kind of be cheesy, but, you know, I've always heard of it being called the Department of Corrections. So where does Department of Corrections intersect with, you know, truly correcting an action, rehabilitating somebody, intervening in certain habits or anything like that? Like where is the current landscape on that? And I'm sure that it differs regionally, but you know, in your daily work and in some of your you know, initiative work, do you do anything around this idea of corrections?
I don't do anything around, I guess, the ideal of corrections. Our thrust at the CJC is one, not only of a restorative justice agency, but also a public safety agency. And I think safety, you know, is something that resonates with everyone. Everyone wants to be safe. So how do you do that? Lowering recidivism, to me, I think is the key to doing that. It's not enough to have a job, a house, and all of the other things we oftentimes think that goes along with a successful re-entry. That's all a person needs is a job, you know, some family support and all of that. Some of the most brilliant, intelligent, wealthy, politically connected people that I have ever met in my life, I met in prison. So there was a single thing I think that had all of us gathered in that spot, at least for those of us that held some culpability for being there. We all know that there are innocent people that are incarcerated. I mean, if you think about the Beatrice 6 case, some of you may not know about the Jackson Marion case of 1897. Ernest Jackson is a more recent case that comes to mind of an innocent person that is incarcerated. So, you know, you start there with not having people incarcerated that shouldn't be there. But above and beyond that, for those that do hold some level of culpability for being in prison, I think it really comes down to changing that mindset. Like I say, it's not going to be the connection you have, the job you have, the wealth you have. It's going to come down to those cognitive issues that people have that make poor choices, poor decisions, unless and until that can be corrected. Then recidivism will continue at a rate like this country has never known. The national recidivism rate for the United States is right at about 76, 77%. I know no business that would be allowed to operate with that type of loss. Think of it in this way. 7 out of 10 people are going to return to prison. If those were planes, how many of you would be willing to get on a plane if every 7 out of 10 was going to crash?
Wow. We have time for probably one last quick question if anybody has a question.
I would just, Shakur, could you just talk about the possibility of building a new prison in Nebraska? Pros and cons and what we could do, you know, as far as contacting our legislators about it?
So my line of work frequently has me asking the question, these days, what would a world look like without prisons? People oftentimes look at me like I have lost my mind. Shakur, there are always going to be prisons. But there was a time in which it wasn't. We just weren't around, any of us weren't around when that time existed. But I think, obviously there has to be some type of system for people where they have committed some harm in society, so that society can be protected. But what should that look like? I think you are going in the wrong direction if you operate under the field of dreams philosophy. If you build it, they will come. Any facility you build, you will fill it. So I think that just goes in the wrong direction. The state, I think, needs to ask itself, why is another prison necessary if you can't fully staff the ones you have now? There are other ways to get at this problem. I think the country as a whole is just going a different way than it could. And that's going to, I think, involve changing hearts, minds, and souls to make people think outside of what they have traditionally experienced, thinking that that's all there is. There's always something else.
Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you everybody for attending tonight's Omaha Table Talk. I would like to take this moment to thank Chantel for being our moderator, and Shakur and Dominique for being on our panel tonight. Molly just shared out our link to our evaluation page, and I'm going to show you what you're going to see when you click on that. So when you click on that link, you'll see this page. It is a relatively, actually, it really is a quick, short evaluation survey that we're just asking everybody to fill out either tonight or when you get that link in the email tomorrow or Thursday. Again, that does help us understand how we can improve and what you thought of the quality of tonight's event. And that does
help. Ask a question. Yes. How many of you have attended an in-person table talk prior to this year? Awesome. And how many of you have never attended a table talk before today, or only attended a virtual table talk? Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you to all of you. We're looking forward to the day where we can be back in person. These events are typically, we have difficult conversations over comfort food, so we want to feed you again someday. And we're interested with this evaluation and how we can make these virtual events better, more interactive, more engaging. So thank you so much for taking time to fill this out for us. Sorry, Dominic, I didn't mean to steal your thunder. I was just interested to see who had experienced both and one or the other. So thank you.
No, thank you. And again, thank you all for joining. Our next table talk is actually our in partnership with Out Nebraska, and this will be our first queer table talk of the year. And that will be on Tuesday, December 1st at 6 o'clock. Registration for that can be found just like for this one through our Eventbrite page or our link to that on Facebook or site. And if I can maybe ask Christy can share that registration link in our chat. It will also be within the email, the thank you email as well. That queer table talk will be with Tommy Young Dennis, Daryl Brown Jr., and Luke Peterson, who will be talking about living positively with HIV. And it will be on World AIDS Day, so a fitting conversation. With that, I thank you again so much for taking your time to be with us tonight, and we'll see you next time.